All right, so here we are. We're back. Now we got some ammunition on the table, and we're going to talk a little bit about ammo selection. Okay, we're not going to go too in depth on a bunch of different calibers. First thing I'm going to start off is I'm going to talk about is caliber selection. Okay, you got a lot of different options out there when it comes to your firearms and what calibers you want to choose them at. And without getting into the benefits and the pros and cons of each individual round, which ballistics forums have debated this, since the beginning of black powder type stuff, and it'll never stop. There will always be a newer, better round. One will penetrate better than the other. One will stop better than the other. One will be more accurate than the other. So there's a lot of different things. When it comes to defensive ammunition, some of the things that you want to think about. Okay, one is on your ammo selection. The higher the caliber you go, or the bigger the fat of the round you go, you're going to drop in magazine capacity. Okay, and then the smaller, I don't have any 45 laying around or any of the bigger calibers or anything like that to compare. But what I do have is I do have some of the 5.7 ammunition here. So as you move into a smaller diameter round, so this 5.7, you run into the bullets are just overall skinnier. Okay, so I'm going to set this down so I'm not moving around. You can get a better shot on it. So you run into a slimmer package. So that's why the 5.7, you can run a magazine on this one, because these rounds are so slim. This comes with a standard 20 round magazine, because you can stack these things in there because they're so slim. A 20 round magazine for a 9mm is going to be much bigger, much longer. It'll be shorter in depth because it's a shorter overall length of the cartridge, but the height of the magazine will be taller. So as you get into your 45 caliber stuff like that, the fatter it gets, you're going to start getting into single stack, or if you run a double stack in 45, it's going to be a big fat magazine. It's going to be a big fat gun, but you got stopping power, all this other stuff, but then 45, as you get out to further distances, slows down, and its ballistic coefficient drops, and it becomes less accurate, whereas these shorter, high-powered, flatter shooting rounds stay accurate for longer. So there's a lot to be involved, but off the table, other calibers off the table, all done. What we are looking at today is we're looking at 9mm. Right now, 9mm is the reigning champ for defensive carry ammunition. It's the best overall performer. It's small enough to fit into small guns. It has enough stopping power to stop the threat, and it has, depending on the load that you pick, has enough penetrating power to get into thicker materials, coats and behind barriers, through doors, stuff like that, depending on the round that you want. So all we're going to talk about right now is 9mm, because that's the reigning champ. Just about all defensive guns you see come in 9mm. You'll have some that'll be 380. You'll have some that'll be some other odd caliber or something like that. But 9mm is the champ, so we're sticking with it. Okay, 9mm. Starting off with ammunition, you have regular ball ammunition. And this is just, I'm going to hold these down on the table just a little bit so we can get a little bit, so as I'm moving these around, it makes it more difficult for Chris. So you have standard ball ammunition. So this is going to be more your range stuff. The ball ammunition will have a little bit more penetrating capability because it doesn't have a big open cavity to open and mushroom the round out, so it will be able to penetrate better into deeper and thicker substances. But this is typically considered more your range ammunition. These come in at a lower cost because the production of the round is easier, and it just is something that just ends up overall coming in at a lower cost. This is another 9mm ball ammunition as well, but the only reason I threw this up here is because they have a different kind of finish here. So you have, one has a nickel plating on the case, and one is just standard brass. Okay, so when it comes to your ammunition, you can get a couple of different kinds. So this is standard brass casing. This is nickel plated. Nickel plated, one is after they plate it, it creates a smoother surface, so it has better, less friction coefficient when it comes to feeding, but it also has a higher resistance to corrosion. Brass will corrode over time, and just like anybody's ever seen anything made of brass, as it sits out and becomes exposed to the elements, it starts to tarnish and turn green and all these other things. Well, brass cased ammunition will do the same thing. So if it's left in a human environment, it will start to tarnish. Well, as that tarnish builds up, that becomes a more friction, a higher friction coefficient on the surface area of the casing itself. So for better feeding, you can go to a nickel-plated brass casing. There are other casings as well. You have aluminum, which is a very soft metal and very low cost round, and you also have a lot of steel case rounds as well. Steel case ammunition got a really bad rap for a long time because they used to be coated in a lacquer that protected the steel from rusting, so that the rounds wouldn't rust before you got a chance to use them. Well, that would heat up in the gun. That lacquer would then transfer onto the inner chamber of the firearm, and then would cause feeding issues because it would get gummed up with cooked on lacquer from the ammunition. Well, a lot of them don't use that anymore. They use different techniques to protect the metal, and they use different techniques and different things to coat the metal to give it a lower friction coefficient. So aluminum and steel really isn't that bad a deal anymore. We did a little bit of testing with it before. Only problem we run into with steel and aluminum is that there are a higher percentage of defects in rounds per box. So the aluminum is so soft that as the machine comes by and presses the projectile down into the casing, sometimes they press too hard or something, and it puts a little nick into the casing or bends the casing a little bit. So we noticed a lot of deformities around the rim of the casings on those softer metals. Does it affect the round itself and the functioning of the round? No, overall it doesn't, but if it does become bent, you can totally prevent that by inspecting your rounds as you load them and looking at whether or not it's bent. So your softer and the steel casings aren't as big a deal anymore as well, because of the coatings they use for the rust prevention, and the coatings they put on there for anti-friction, like if it's some type of graphite or something that you can usually, as you load a bunch of 9mm steel case rounds, you'll notice you'll get that black substance on your hand. That's the coating, and that's the graphite or whatever it is that they put on there that gives it the little bit of lubrication, so it doesn't stick when it's running steel on the feed ramps and in the chambers. Okay, so and the metals that they use are a softer metal. So metals can always be hardened to different Rockwell hardnesses, and your barrels are hardened to the hardest they can get them, and the metals that they're using for the casings are at a malleable enough hardness. I don't know the proper term, but they're not near as hard as the steel barrels. So the round and the casing itself will deform before the barrel ever does. So you're not in danger of damaging your chambers on your firearms and stuff like that. They got the metallurgy and the right combination now, where those are not as big a deal. Okay, so we're talking about casings. One of the latest and greatest advancements in casings also is our Liberty ammunition. We just did a review on this. The new thing now is they're able to come out with ultralight. I'm gonna set this down because I keep wanting to handle it. It's a better viewing here. This is a bimetal case, so it has a brass casing here, and then it has an alloy upper half of the casing here. So what that does is it allows this cartridge to be much lighter, but yet still retain all the strength and the characteristics of the brass casings. So this is a nickel-plated brass on the bottom of the casing, and then this is the alloy here. And then these are also copper spun rounds on here as well. We're not talking about the projectiles just yet. Right now we're just talking about the casings. So this is the latest and greatest and most technologically advanced casings that are available. This round is ridiculously light. This round here weighs half the weight of this round here, just by the materials and the process, okay? So now we've talked about casings. Let's get on to projectiles. We talked a little bit about the ball projectiles having a little bit more penetration capability because they don't open and deform. They're not designed to do that. They're just meant to be aerodynamic enough to remain stable and to fly accurately. These are usually copper jacketed, and then with a lead core or something like that on the center. And then we get into our defensive rounds. So as a new gun owner, you're going to be looking at defensive rounds. So what you want to do is you want to pick a round that is best suited for your pistol. If you're shooting a short barrel pistol, if you have a round that has a very high powder charge, the bullet isn't getting up to speed in the short barrel of a small compact gun. So what that does is that allows for all that extra powder. If it has a really high powder charge in it, all that powder is going to burn outside of the gun, outside of the barrel. So when you pull the trigger on that, it's going to put out this amazing fireball. A little bit of waste, but also some of the things that you want to think about are if you're using this at night. If you have the possibility that you should be using this in a defensive situation at night, that big fireball ruins your night vision. You're in a dark alley, you're in a dark parking garage, you're in your home and the lights are out, and you have to fire one shot off down in a hallway or living room or somewhere in your own home. When that big fireball goes off in your face, all you're going to see is a big spot. It's going to be a big bright spot. Your night vision's ruined. Your eyes are trying to readjust. That person is now either running away from you, or they're running at you, or they're laying there dead. One of the two. So one of the three. But the thing is that you won't be able to see that right away. You're gonna have to take a split second and blink your eyes a couple times and figure out how to, and listen and use your other senses to figure out what's going on, because you're essentially going to be blinded by it. So you have SIG has done a great job on part of this. Is they've developed a line and specifically for short barrel guns. And what that does is that takes a little bit of powder charge out of it from your standard loads, and it takes a little bit of the powder charge off, so you don't have that brilliant ball of fire shooting out the end that ruins your night vision and leaves you essentially blind for a millisecond or two. But in a gunfight, that half a second that it takes your eyes to adjust is an eternity. Okay, so when you're fighting for your life, that makes a big difference. All right, moving on to the projectiles themselves. We're talking about the powder loads. Moving on to the projectiles themselves, we talked about the ball. Now we're into the hollow point. Okay, so we have a lot of different options. There are several different options. You got HST, federal HST, maximum expansion. You got Hornaday. You've got federal. You got all these different kinds that are, all these bullets here that you see that are hollow tipped. These are all designed so that when they hit the body, that cavity fills up with material and creates hydraulic pressure because our bodies are filled with water. So, and all our tissues are mostly full of water. When it hits our body, it doesn't compress. That hydraulic pressure then forces that cone to expand. When that cone expands, it makes this bullet much wider. So this 9mm bullet here will, once it hits and creates that hydraulic pressure and fills up with water, this will then expand and become much, much wider, almost to the point of like a .45 caliber or something like that. These and different bullets expand at different rates. They're designed to expand at different depths. They're designed to expand to different widths. So there's a lot of different stuff that goes into here, but what you're looking for is high quality ammunition that is designed to do this for defensive situation. And some of these you have pre-fragmented. You have hollow points that have, some of them will have a material in here to keep it from opening prematurely if it hits like a heavy material or something like that. So there's a lot to choose from in here. So when you're trying to make your selection, those are some of the things you want to take into account. If you're living in an area and it's a dead of winter, that everyone's wearing heavy jackets and parkas and things like that, you may want to pick one that doesn't open up as wide because you may want it to penetrate a little bit deeper. So those are some of the things that you need to really take into account. And then also bullet speed. So we've got the ones that have the lower powder charge are going to be traveling at a lower velocity. And then on the extreme polar opposite, we have Liberty Defense, which we tested as well, that this is traveling almost as fast as a rifle round. So there's going to be different pros and cons to each round, but this particular ammunition here uses that velocity to then force the cone or force this projectile to expand even wider and dump its energy in an even shorter distance because it has a lower grain weight. Final thing that I'd like to say is whatever you pick, whatever round you do decide to use, you pick like a SIG here. So one of the things you want to take into consideration is picking a round that weighs the same as your defensive round. So as you become better with your marksmanship, being a new shooter, as you become better with your marksmanship, you're going to get better. You're going to, at 10, 15 yards, as you start to reach out at greater distances and you start to get your group in smaller and smaller and smaller, and you get used to your aiming point with your gun as you're training with it as you should, you will get used to those aiming points. Well, if you get used to shooting a 115 grain training round, and then you step up to a 124 grain defensive round or something like that, then that could change your point of impact in your aiming points. So one of the things I definitely suggest is that if you pick whatever you pick to train with, you pick that same grain weight bullet as well. So that's all we have for you on this. We hope that this information is useful to our new gun owners, and we'd just like to say welcome to the family and hope you enjoy being able to defend yourself properly.